Well, I'm delighted to be joined today by Amber, who plays Tamar in the Chosen. Now, for those who haven't seen the Chosen yet, first, what are you doing? But second, Tamar isn't who you might think of when you hear that name. It's not the woman from the genealogy. It's one of those sort of extra biblical characters, people who are referred to as and many others, or we might think of sort of you and me. And before I get to the questions, I just want to get an apology in first of all to Amber. If I say Tamar, that's how I've been saying it all my life. So it's not English arrogance insisting on my pronunciation. That's just what I've said, but I'm going to try and say Tamar. Um, but first up, what's it like playing a sort of a character who there is nothing of in the scriptures explicitly, nothing to work with? Is that, did you think that made it more difficult, or is that liberating in some respects?
Oh, it's absolutely liberating because then you can take you can have a bit more play with the direction that it's going and who she is, and you can influence a bit more. Whereas if you have kind of people who existed, there is an expectation or for sure a path, a journey that they're on that you can't really manipulate at all. You might be able to inspire. So for example, for season 4, we can kind of see the reasons why we call Thomas doubting Thomas. And so I think that with Tamar and Tamar, I hear both ways, so you're fine, Father. You're fine. I love that with her, that not only is an opportunity for the writers to kind of play, but it's an opportunity for me to do so as well. And yeah, I think it's a little bit easier, actually. A lot more responsibility, but a bit easier.
Yeah, and I guess it frees you from the problem of potentially difficult priests like me saying, "Oh, you got him wrong," or "She's not like that, and
Exactly.
she's not like that in the scriptures. She was supposed to be like this."
Precisely.
And then how closely then do you think do you relate personally to Tamara? Are we seeing a very different you? Because a little birdie tells me you're quite a fan of sword fighting. Um,
I am. I feel like Tamar would totally do that if if given the opportunity.
okay,
she um, well, when I first came on the show, Tamar is definitely far more bold than I ever was at the time. And I think as the seasons have progressed, I don't know if it's by accident or not, but I am noticing that we have so much more in common. Our mannerisms, our likes, our dislikes. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm bleeding into the character is bleeding into me, or the writers are just kind of, now that we have kind of been established in these roles, that they're writing them for us as artists, as actors, while staying respectful and authentic and true to the story. Yeah, so I think that that as time goes on, that we're kind of becoming, I don't know, kind of like sisters a bit.
that's fascinating. C.S. Lewis actually, here's an interesting point. He says in the Christian life, speaking from his perspective, he says we have to start out acting who we want to become. That we have to first of all pretend to be children of God, and then in that way we actually more fully become children of God. So it's interesting to hear your experience on that.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Excellent. Always a good man to agree with, C.S. Lewis.
We
Um,
call it fake till you make it.
that's another way. That's the the English take more words to say what the Americans can say in full. Um, there's a brilliant book that I've been reading recently called the Love is God, The Love That Is God by a deacon called Frederick Christian Bowersmith, and he makes the point that for most of us the most important moral decision we make in our lives is who to be friends with. And I think your entrance into the Chosen sort of way back in season 1 provides a really beautiful and powerful example of this when sort of confronted by Mary, um, you there's that lovely line where I think you say, wouldn't you want your friends to make a scene? What you do for the sake of friendship. Can you tell us a little bit about, if you can cast your mind back that far, to that scene?
It was a long time ago. No, there's something I always say about Tamar. It's like everyone needs a Tamar in their life, and if you don't have one, you should be one. And it is because she is such a beautiful, shining example of the love and passion that we want to surround ourselves with, the people that we surround ourselves with. And she was resilient and determined and caring. And we saw even in season 2, she's still with him. And I found that filming that scene, it inspired me in many ways, because I feel sometimes very much like Tamar in this sense of that I go out of my way for the people in my life. I want to be the friend to them that I would want. However, I don't do it so that they can do that for me. It's much like the difference between polite and kindness. We're polite in order to receive the response that we want. We're nice in order to receive a certain response, a agreeable response from someone, but kindness expects nothing in return. And this is how I'd like to surround myself with people like this, who are this way for nothing in return. But definitely I do it as an example to myself, and just kind of keep pushing through life this way. And I still do that, and I don't want that to change. I don't think you will make that change about me, and I feel the same about Tamar.
Yeah, and I read with this scene, this was actually your very first time on set, that you hadn't had a great deal to do with the cast beforehand, and so here you are actually playing this scene where not always people don't always realize, but this is actually a revelation for Christians that Jesus is God. This isn't just the healing, but when he's forgiving sins, he's taking on an authority. So that was a pretty big opening to come in with.
It was. I'm trying to remember the exact scene I started with, but I know for sure the day that she called out to him from the roof was my very first day on set. And I was just kind of thrown into the washer without any idea of like where we were going and any guidance, because I guess at this point in my career, it was kind of my first time being like not quite the center, but like a centerpiece of the scene or part of it. And it was so beautiful because on that same day too, that Jonathan was just so generous as a scene partner with me before we even started. And it was a lot of responsibility as well, in that I didn't even fully realize at the time. Especially, I didn't realize the impact that scene would have on others, but it's become a favorite of mine, and not just because I'm in it, but for all the things that it represents. As you mentioned, here is Jesus standing there saying, "Who does you say who does this guy is? I think he has the authority to forgive sins." And it was just like, oh my gosh, like. Just to see the face of Shmuel in that scene, I was like, how is he reading my mind? How does he know this is what I'm thinking? And then the moment where Nicodemus sees Ethan, the paralytic, walk out, and just there was no words shared, just a look. Everything about that was a cinematic masterpiece. It was beautiful. It spoke to people's faith, and it was such a joy and an honor to be a part of.
Yeah, that's lovely. I can see your face still really lighting up as you speak about it. And one of our volunteers here, she said that watching it, she felt like it was clearly a very powerful scene for you as an actor to play. Then continue with this theme of friendship. And you said you've not had much sort of interaction with Jesus at this point, and yet you take a massive of leap of faith. That sort of friendship now, sort of especially in season 3 with Mary Magdalene, sort of takes you into a slightly more difficult place, doesn't it? There's a tension existing between the two of you. Can you tell us a little bit about the sort of acting out of that?
Yeah, no, it was kind of simple. Actually, the emotion part, not so much, but the getting to this place and having this conversation, because it's a conversation that so many people need to have, and a lot of us fail to have, and how I love that Tamara in this scene takes the initiative, because what would have happened if she just allowed Mary to sit there festering on what was bothering her. And then a lot of times our reactions to someone who's treating us differently may be to immediate defensive mode. And now we're acting awkward or isolating ourselves or being rude or something. And I love that she didn't allow it to get to that point. I love that they wrote it this way. And also it just highlighted a lot of the some of the issues that we even go through uniquely as women sometimes, is that how we hold and we carry these burdens and we don't allow ourselves to give them to God and let them go. And she sits there and she asks, are we okay? So she initiated this interaction. And not only did she initiate it, but she was receptive to the answer, which wasn't necessarily the thing she wanted to hear, but she was receptive to it. And she even kind of was like, well, I'm sorry. But she also stood her ground and owned her space in this. And I love how she so kindly corrected Mary and reminded her that you are carrying these burdens that no longer belong to you. Why are you doing this? And it's just a beautiful example of, like we mentioned before, about this friendship of keeping people in our lives that aren't just yes men. Keeping people in our lives aren't just going to enable us to do things, everything, who will hold us accountable as friends. Um, and I thought that was a gorgeous example of two women coming together over and discussing amicably their differences, passionately, but amicably. And I think it was a perfect example for a lot of us that we should be taking in our daily lives, absolutely, of taking the initiative, being receptive, and also holding yourself and others accountable.
Yeah, there's an awful lot in there. One of the things that it had me reflect on as somebody in religious life and living with a community is we we all pick to follow Jesus, but we don't get to pick who we follow Jesus with. And that's one of the beautiful things that the Chosen draws out. Everybody there is attracted by Jesus Christ, but they wouldn't have necessarily picked to be with the other people that they're with.
We see that in almost every episode because the boys are just always going at it to a point where the girls are like, let's just go because this will be another 45 minutes of them. And I have six brothers, and that's exactly what it looks like. And I tell you, they would lay down their life for each other. You know, they love each other. They're brothers, but they bicker like there's no tomorrow. And I think it's so true. It's like you don't get to choose who's going on this journey with you, but you do learn how to work and live together. And we see that happening every episode because there's always that one person, Mary often, and it's so funny to see Simon Peter also becoming like the guy Mary. It's like, okay, guys, let's calm down, let's think, because it's such a 180 to how we saw him introduced in season one. And I think it's just really nice to see the journey that we go on as human beings, that we're not stagnant, we're not monoliths. We continue to grow and change, and growth isn't linear, and we fall back sometimes. And it takes us on a journey, and I really love it.
Yeah, but there's this sort of bold decision from you, first of all, to seek Jesus's healing for your friend way back in season one, and now there's this sort of growth in trust that has to go on, where it's almost that initial step that you first made of faith, it now has to turn into a lived reality, and there's almost some things of yourself seem to be necessary to give up in order to become more fully yourself.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, all of them left behind something, and they all. I believe that was even stated in the series at one point in time, is that we all have to leave something behind in order to follow him. You know,
Yeah.
whether it's our own lives or something sentimental to us, or just part of ourselves that we couldn't let go. And Tamar is no exception. I mean, but I think at the same time, she was seeking out a family as well. And so for her, it was very little question of if she would or if she could. She didn't need anyone to convince her. She didn't need to be asked. Like, no one asked her. She was just like, I'm coming. And that's that. And which is amazing because she had no idea who he was beyond who she witnessed him being. So everyone else kind of had this idea of who he was supposed to be, you know, they're raised learning about the Messiah and whatnot. And she's just like, I see you for who you are right now. And there's no question about me wanting to follow you. And obviously the hard part comes at is after you make that decision, because to follow it is just not the easy, making the decision is usually the easy part. And so now we see the changes that come afterwards.
Yeah. Somebody once said to me, it's not so much that the leap of faith that we make in believing, it's the leap of faith that we make in having to live out our beliefs and sort of trust that following and living in this way will actually fulfill. And that's something I'm very grateful to you and your fellow cast members for the way you illustrate that so beautifully. Perhaps just one last question, if I got the time just before we wrap up. How did you because the backstory isn't completely clear with you from the beginning. How did you decide sort of how to go with sort of accent wise, and did at any point you think, oh, I wish I'd picked a different accent, or this is hard to keep with?
Well, it kind of evolves with you as you kind of fall into something that fits in. I try to be as authentic as possible, but with Tamar, we only know the heritage of her father. And we know that she also grew up and spent some time as a youth in Egypt, but we have no idea the heritage of her mother. And we know that she spent the majority of her, at least her young adult life and maybe adolescence in a port town. And so I believe that all of that together kind of affected her accent. And if you've ever lived anywhere for a long period of time, I live in Spain now, but I'm from Texas. My accent is I go home and they're like, you have something's off, like your voice sounds different. And I find that the same thing is likely what happened with Tamar's. At least that's how I perceive. It's like she's been in this place so long that obviously the linguistics have rubbed off on her, and we see her accent evolve. But it's also pretty consistent with her personality, and so she doesn't try to mimic, and I don't try to mimic anyone else's accent. But yeah, I do notice from episode 1, the season 1. I'm not sorry, episode 6, season 1 to episode 6, season 4, that there is a bit of a difference.
Okay, I hadn't noticed the change. I just wondered how you went with it in your head, because it's you are such a fascinating, sort of slightly mysterious character, but we're learning more.
An enigma.
Thanks so much for your time. It's been a real joy to do this, and I wish you all the best. And I hope to see you in future seasons.
Thank you, Father. Be blessed. Bye-bye.
God bless. Bye-bye.